Hey everyone, this is William Roberts here with jamplay.com, and you are joining me for week 7 of chord progression of the week. So for the past 2 weeks, we were talking about dominant chords, how they function normally within a key and how we can use them to shift key centers, how we can use tritone substitutions to add a little bit more tension to our progressions. And we're going to be kind of following off of that. So now we're going to be talking about borrowed chords and how we can use borrowed chords to kind of, again, shift key centers, use substitutions, create some things that maybe add a little bit of tension but don't necessarily sound out. So when I say the term borrowed chord, it has a very specific meaning, which I'll talk about. And it also has, I'm going to interpret the meaning of it a little bit within this progression. So when somebody says a borrowed chord, most often what they're talking about is, let's say I'm in a major key, like I will be in today's progression, so key of D major. I want to look at the chords in the parallel minor, so that being D minor, and I want to see if I can borrow some of those chords and insert them into my progression of D major. That way I can have this kind of dual tonality that's happening. And that might sound like a really high-level theoretical concept, but it's actually something that's a lot more common than you might think. So that's kind of the straight-up definition that we have for borrowed chords. But like I said, I'm going to take some creative liberties with that definition, and I'll show you in this progression. So we'll have one instance where I'm using a borrowed chord that is really just working directly off of that definition that I gave you, and then another one where I'm kind of using that idea, but getting a little bit more creative with it. So without further ado, let me play you this progression, and then I'll break it down for you. Awesome. So that's our first progression, and the unique thing about this week too that you're seeing, that you'll start to see in these kind of last coming weeks, is I added a B section. So this song has an A section and a B section, and part of the reason I did that too is because since we're now getting a little bit more into advanced harmony and some harmony that's gonna do some key shifting, I don't want them to all be short progressions. I want there to be space for these concepts to breathe, because a lot of times these are really, really cool concepts to learn and insert in a progression, but if you're inserting it in, a 3 or 4 bar progression and you're trying to insert the concept a bunch of times, it might sound like you're trying to do a little much, right? So I wanted to space things out just a tiny bit with an A section and a B section so that I could let some of these concepts breathe and not just feel like I was, trying to insert everything in this quick little time. So let me break down this progression with you. Like I said, this is going to be in the key of D major. And my first chord is going to be this D major 9, and I'm doing something special on this. So first let me show you the straight up voicing. So I'm using my middle finger here on the 5th fret of the A string, my first finger here on the 4th fret of the D string, and then I'm going to be barring that first finger so that it's also getting this 4th fret of the G string, and I'll talk about why in a second. Then I'm using my pinky finger here to get the 6th fret of the G string, and then my ring finger here is on the 5th fret of that B string. And so the reason I'm barring is because a lot of times when I'm doing this major 9, you'll see in each major 9 I used in this progression, I'm doing this. So this is a really, really common thing. You hear it in a lot of R&B, a lot of modern music that's coming out now. When people play, and it really, I think, comes a lot from guitar players wanting to play like piano players, which, you know, is one of the end goals when we're talking about harmony. I'm hammering on from the 6 to the major 7, right? So it's got that really, really cool sound, and it creates movement within your chord. And also, once you get some dexterity with your pinky, it might be, if you've never really done, you know, like Jimi Hendrix stuff where you have all these trills with your pinky, this might be a little bit new, but this is a great starting point. And once you get that dexterity, now you're kind of adding this whole other rhythmic element to your chords too. So even if I just had, you know, quarter notes, if I start to add this little hammer-on thing, you see it already has all this like kind of punch and oomph to it. So this is a really, really great thing that happens with major 9 chords. So this is my first chord. And then I'm basically just taking the voicing up, right, to G major 9. So for G major 9, middle finger on the 10th fret of the A string, first finger on the 9th fret of the D string, pinky finger on the 11th fret of the G string, and then again, my first finger is kind of barring across so that I can get that sound. And then I have my ring finger here on the 10th fret of the B string, so. And you can see too, I also have, you know, a couple different options for how I want to hit that, so I can just go. I can also kind of stagger it so that I'm getting the 9 afterwards, so it goes 6, 7, 9. It's almost like kind of just walking up the scale. Skipping the root note, of course. And then for my right hand, what I'm doing with that too is it's kind of a technique I've talked about week to week, but I'm basically thinking about it as my thumb is handling the low note, and then I'm just going to assign the next 3 notes to my first finger, my ring finger, and my middle finger. And I'm just kind of going in order. So I have a straight up roll that I can do. So that's just going thumb, index, middle, ring. And I'm kind of mixing it up between doing that roll. So that was the roll. And just kind of alternating of bass note, upper structure. And then lastly, kind of just doing everything at the same time, but I'm not playing it with a pick. If I was playing with a pick, I could still get that effect, but because I have each finger assigned to each string, it just has a little bit different timbre. It feels like everything is really isolated and clear, and you know, you get the sound of, you know, individual flesh on each string. It's not, I'm not waiting for a pick to get each note, right? I'm kind of attacking every single note at exactly the same time, so it can add a little bit more to the rhythm. So we have D major 9 to G major 9 comes the fun stuff. Now F sharp major 9. So I'm literally just taking this position and moving it down a half step. So that's 9 on the A string with my middle finger. My first finger's on the 8th fret of the D string. My pinky finger is on the 10th fret of the G, and then my ring finger is on that 9th fret of the B. So you'll notice my hand's not changing at all, right? For these first couple chords that are happening within the progression. So if you're new to this position and you kind of want to get a little bit more comfortable with major 9s, we can actually isolate this little beginning part. And we can just work on that initial technique that I talked about, right? Where I'm just kind of working on hammering on with my pinky. And my right hand too, if you want to incorporate that technique as well. And that in itself is kind of a cool progression too. So, you know, it's fun when we get to practice things that are technique based, but actually sound cool too. So, that's what we have so far. Then I'm going to D7 sharp 9. So we've done this guy in the weeks prior when we've been talking about altered chords. So this is an altered dominant chord. So I have my middle finger here on the 7th fret of the A string. My first finger is going to be here on the 6th fret of the D. My ring finger is going to be on the 7th fret of the G. And then my pinky is going to be on the 8th fret of the B. And if I want to, I can even kind of flatten my first finger across and do that same kind of motion that I have. If I want to add that too, I can have my first finger barring here, and this is actually kind of a cool motion because what I'm doing is this would be a E7 flat 9 to an E7 sharp 9. So I'm basically kind of playing up the altered scale in that top voicing. Again, like I said, the kind of end goal a lot of times with harmony or with guitar players is they see what a piano player can do with 10 fingers and they're like, I want to replicate, you know, something with that. So this is all kind of in that vein where you'll hear a lot of piano players, they'll have movement in the middle of their chord or in the top of their chord when they're playing. That's why a lot of times when they're accompanying, you know, they don't just sound like, you know, a guitar playing chords. They sound like they have this movement within them, this whole kind of vocal element or orchestral element where there is still movement and there's kind of an interplay with the singer, right? So these are all techniques that we can use to kind of get at that sound that piano players can do. So I went from this guy, my D major 9, my G major 9, my F sharp major 9, to E7 sharp 9, and then I'm going to do G over A, right? So we've talked about this before, so I'm doing this instead of just my normal dominant chord. So I have a little bit more color, and I'm deliberately skipping the third. So to play this guy, I have my ring finger over here on the 5th fret of the E string, my pinky here on the 5th fret of the D, my middle finger on the 4th fret of the G, and then my first finger on the 3rd fret of the B. So I'm skipping that A string, and again, just doing that same hand technique where I have my thumb on the E string, and then the top 3 notes are covered by my index finger, my middle finger, and my ring finger. So, all together, D major 9, G major 9, F sharp major 9, E7 sharp 9, G over A. All right, and now I have the B section of this progression. So I have this chord. So this is going to be a very, very difficult chord if you're new to, you know, kind of these more extended voicings. This one will be tricky, so I'm going to give 2 versions of this chord. So this is the first version, so this is the hard one. So the way I'm kind of voicing this is I have this upper structure and this bass note, right? So for the upper structure, I have my first finger, and it's barring from the D string 3rd fret to the E string 3rd fret. So that's kind of part 1. Then I'm going to take my middle finger and put it on the 5th fret of the G string. That'll be the 3rd fret of the B string that'll be achieved from that first finger bar, and then my ring finger is coming up here for that 5th fret of the high E string, right? And now here comes the fun part, or the not so fun part, depending on how you look at it. I think it's fun. Now I'm coming over here and I'm getting the root note with my pinky finger, right? So reaching over and getting the pinky note, the 6th fret on the E string with my pinky. And then doing that same kind of pattern, but I'm not actually going to use my pinky on that high E string. I'll just use my ring finger again to double dip. So like I said, this is a pretty advanced chord, and I completely understand if this one's just a little bit too tricky. There's a lot of, you know, this in itself is kind of a weird stretch in that I have to separate my first finger far from my my ring finger and my middle finger, but kind of adding that pinky can just be adding insult to injury, right? So this is a B flat major 9, right? So where this was the voicing we were doing before, I'm now using this kind of really open, cool sounding voicing. And you can see too, the struggle is worth it. It does have a really cool kind of open and modern sound. But like I said, I want to give you another version because I know this one's a little bit tricky. So we can also do this. So you'll notice I'm deliberately skipping the root note, right? I'm actually just doing that upper structure because the bass is already covering it. So again, just barring my first finger across the D string, G string, B string, and E string. That part doesn't change, but now I don't have to use my middle finger and ring finger. I can use my ring finger and pinky finger on the 5th fret of the G string and the 5th fret of the high E string. So that makes it a little bit easier. I don't have to do a stretch that's kind of as extreme as that. So that's my B flat major 9, this voicing or this voicing. now we're doing a G major 7 over A. So I'm using my pinky to play the 5th fret of the D string, my ring finger to play the 4th fret of the G, middle finger to play the 3rd fret of the B, first finger to play the 2nd fret of the high E, and luckily, because I have an open A string, I can kind of play that guy all together. So this is a nice special chord for, the key of D major, because I have that open string. So a lot of times too, I usually am trying to play closed voicings, but I will look for those special opportunities where the bass note will be an open string, so I can do a little bit more with the upper structure. So that B section again, going from this B flat major 9, or this voicing for B flat major 9, to G major 7 over A. And then I'm just repeating that, going back. All right, so now I'd like to actually break down how I'm kind of coming up with this chord progression and how I'm using the idea of borrowed chords to come up with this. So oddly enough, it's actually going to make a little bit more sense if I start with the B section, because there's not as much going on there and it's a little bit more straightforward. So I mentioned in the beginning of the clip that I used kind of 2 instances of what I would maybe consider borrowed chords. One's a little bit more straightforward and one's my creative interpretation of it. So this one in the B section is a more straightforward usage of a borrowed chord. So we're in the key of D major, right? So this is going to be my 1 chord. And if I was normally to play, the chords that I would be arriving at within the key of D major, I would have G major, A major, and then B minor, right? Or, if I wanted to put the extensions on that, G major 7, A7, and B minor 7. So how did I get this funky chord, right? Because that's clearly not in the key of D major. So this is the concept of a borrowed chord, right? So like I said at the beginning, I'm going to look at the parallel minor. So that means if I'm in a minor key, I just want to look at, if I'm in D minor, I want to look at D major, and vice versa. So since I'm in D major, I want to look at D minor. So I'm in the key of D minor, and what I'm actually doing here is I'm taking the 6th chord of D minor. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 is B flat major, right? So if I was in the key of D minor, this would be kind of like a 6, 1, right? So what I'm doing is I'm saying, okay, I have this chord in the parallel minor that I rather like, and I'd kind of like to bring it into my major sound. So I have my major 1, but now I'm kind of thinking about it, right, with this major 6. You can already kind of hear the qualities of it, right? Where that sounds like, that doesn't really sound out to us. That doesn't sound like something that would be super crazy or, not necessarily, it doesn't sound like I'm shifting key centers. But it does have this kind of cool open sound of, there's some sort of shift happening, right? It's just not super out. It's still kind of, within the pocket, which is what we want. So I am basically taking this chord, and now I'm adding that major 9 to it. So I'm saying, that's cool. I want to make it even a little bit more colorful and make it this guy. So I'm going from, right? So that's kind of the context of it. In the B section, I don't actually play the 1. I just wanted to do that so we could see how I'm getting that chord from the parallel minor, right? So I'm playing this B flat major 9, which I'm borrowing from D minor. We're in the key of D major, but I said I want to go to the 6, which will be like a flat 6, right, in the key of D minor, because the 6 will be flatted. So I'm taking the 6th chord of D minor and inserting it into D major. And then what I'm doing is now I'm going to kind of a normal chord that would be within the key of D major, right? So I'm kind of, just like I was shifting from my 1 to the 6 that was in my minor key, I'm basically now doing that where I'm going between, so I'm taking a chord from the minor key, the 6 from the minor key, and now I'm doing the 5 from the major key, right? And you'll hear too, this also has a really cool quality. Why am I choosing to use this a little more extended version, where now I'm doing a full G major 7, right? Well, you'll hear, I'm basically, I now kind of have this upper structure, which we hear, to this upper structure now, right? So now I have this really cool interplay, because it's really cool when we can hear a chord shifting, you know, up and down. It's a really, really common sound, but now I'm mixing it with some, you know, different harmonic aspects and concepts that now give it the sound of like, wow, this sounds really familiar, but it still has this quality of like I'm shifting in between key centers without going so out. So that's kind of how I'm arriving at that B section. So again, taking the 6 from the minor key, then going to a 5 of the major key. And again, this is my fun 5, right? I'm not doing a dominant 7. I'm kind of doing this fun, ambiguous sus voicing of a G major 7 over A. So that's the B section. Like I said, this is a little bit more of a straight up interpretation of it, right? I'm taking directly from the parallel minor. Now I'm going to show you what I guess would kind of be my creative interpretation of it, because, you know, whenever I'm coming up with progressions, as much as I am a theory person and do always stick to theory and can analyze things, I also do what sounds good. And a lot of times, you know, that involves taking creative liberty and knowing the rules and just how to break them. So I'm here at my 1 chord, right, in the A section. And then I went to my 4 chord, right? So nothing crazy about that. There's really nothing that's kind of out of the key that we're doing. But now I make a shift, and now it's, you know, it's clear that I've done something a little weird, right? So what did I do here? I shifted 1 down, right, to the 3rd of the key, but I made it major. So this one is the one that I'm talking about that's a little bit more of my creative interpretation of it. And the reason it's kind of my interpretation of it is because if I was to be really, really strict about the rules of how I defined a parallel minor, right? I said, I'm in the key of D major. So if I want to play the 3 chord from the parallel minor, that'd be in the key of D minor. And that would be F major, right? So I would go, right? Which sounds cool. That's a perfectly fine progression, and it kind of has the quality of the B section, right? Where I'm gently shifting in between these key centers. It's not super out. But what I wanted to do is I said, you know, I want something that has just a little bit more punch, because a lot of times when I'm writing chord progressions, you know, I just want one specific area that, you know, I use substitutions all the time, but I want one area where it's like, ooh, now that's something that's a little out. That way it kind of has this feeling of every time you go through the progression, you know where you are in it. And the listener, even though they might not know the theory of it, they can go, ooh, we're at that kind of interesting part again. And it has a little bit of an arc to it. So the way I am interpreting this as a borrowed chord is I'm basically saying, okay, well, I have my 3rd of my key, right? And my 3rd is usually a minor chord. And basically what I'm thinking here is, okay, in a minor key, the 3rd is a major chord, right? So in that way, I'm thinking, okay, so now I want to basically take that idea from the parallel minor of the 3rd being major without actually using the specific 3rd from the minor key. So let me just define that again. So if I was to take the actual parallel, if I was actually to look at the parallel minor and take the 3rd from that key, it would be flat, right? So what I'm doing is I'm saying, well, I still want to have my 3rd chord be major, and I want to take that from the minor key, but I don't want to actually use the flat 3rd that happens in the minor key. I want to use my major 3rd, but I still want to make it major and not minor, right? Because normally my 3 chord will be minor, and I'm saying, no, I want to make my 3 chord major, because Because that to me is a little bit more reminiscent of a minor key, right? And I'm doing this for a couple reasons. So reason one is kind of like I had already said before. I want to have a point in my progression where, there's something that sounds a little bit, out, or like I'm shifting a key center for a second. I'm doing that, like I said, throughout the whole progression, but this one really, really kind of gives you a ooh, feeling. So it gives it that arc. And two, the sound of going a half step away using the same chord voicing can just sound really, really interesting, right? If you think about it, it's not something that naturally occurs in any of our chord progressions, if we're being really, really strict about harmony. So when I shift that one down, it's got this really, really cool quality of, just taking everything down one note. So, in a way, if you think about it, the voice leading is great, right? I'm only shifting everything one note. It's just the harmony itself kind of has to follow, right? And also, because I'm using this major 9 voicing, that's what I'm getting in the top voicing, right? So that's kind of a cool top level melody, right? We hear that a lot of time when people are improvising. They'll play, a melody. It's called sidestepping. We'll play a melody like a half step higher and then bring it down a little bit. So this is kind of opening up melodic options to me too. So that's where I'm getting this chord. And like I said, that's a creative interpretation of what a borrowed chord will mean. When I wrote this progression, I wasn't thinking, let me be really, really strict and stingent about these rules because it's not generally how I'm writing or approaching music. I'm saying, these are all some great concepts. I want them to influence me when I'm writing this, but, if I stick to rules, I'm not going to come up with anything original. So, like I said, I'm getting this guy by saying, I want to make this major because in a minor key, the third chord is major, but I'm not actually going to take what would be the third chord from the parallel minor. I'm just going to make it major. So I'm kind of only doing one of the two ingredients, right, that we get to use a borrowed chord. So I have my 1 chord, I have my 4 chord, I have my special third chord, so my third chord as a major substitution. Now I'm going to this guy, right? So I'm going to my E7 altered. And I'm using this because now I've shifted key centers a little bit, right? So I need something to get back to home base. And I have my 5 chord here, right, before I go back to 1. So to get to that, I'm basically playing a 5 of 5, right? So that's coming from the weeks prior where I'm saying, I want to get to this chord, and if I want to get to any chord, often what I can do is I can say, let me take a dominant chord or an altered dominant chord, let me place it a 5th away, and that'll have this, it'll really want to resolve a 5th away, right? So this guy wants to move here. So that's why I put that guy there. I'm just using those concepts from the past 2 weeks. So I'm going from my major third, and it kind of has a nice series of resolutions too. I like the idea of these two guys kind of going back and forth. So I'm going here, going to my 2 chord, but it's a 2 chord that's a 7, right? So this is also a substitution. It's the normal note that would be in the major key, but I'm making it an altered dominant chord. And then I'm going back to my normal 5, right? And like I said, I like to use this guy instead of my 7 because it's avoiding the third, so it has a little bit more color and ambiguity, and I think sounds a little bit better when you resolve back to the 1. And also you'll hear I did a little added bonus. I won't spend too much time on it, but I wanted to add something to make it just a tiny bit more fun and give another cool ooh moment. The third time through the progression, I jumped to this guy really quickly before resolving back down to the 1, right? So, again, using a little bit of a creative interpretation of a rule, tritone substitutions usually apply to dominant chords, right? When we think of tritone substitutions, it's a dominant chord. But what I was doing here is, like I said, I really like the sound of a major 9 a half step away. Something about it just has a really cool quality to me. So I wanted to insert that one more time. So, I'm at my 5 chord, but instead of putting a tritone substitution here, it's actually not super far off to put this guy, right? All the notes are within a half step or are borrowed from a tritone substitution. So that's why I wanted to put this guy, because I really like that sound of approaching from a half step higher with the same exact voicing, right? I'm basically doing the opposite here, where I'm just going, actually, I guess I'm doing the exact same thing, right? So I just wanted another occurrence of that. So I inserted that really quickly so you can try to catch that. But if not, that's not an integral part of the progression. I just wanted to add something a little bit more fun for some of the advanced players who are kind of soaking up these concepts. So, again, I have my 1 chord, my 4 chord, nothing normal or outside of our number system here. Now I have my 3 chord, but I'm making it a major 9, so not a minor 7 like it would normally be. Then I have my 2 chord, but as a 7 sharp 9, so normally this would be a minor chord, and I'm making it a 7 sharp 9, right? So it's actually only got 1 note that's really out of it, right? Because the sharp 9 is the minor 3rd. So this is the only note that I'm adding that kind of gives it a little bit more of an out sound. Then I'm going to my normal 5 of an A over G, and then back to my 1. So that's the progression. Like I said, there's a couple different interpretations of what a borrowed chord is within that. But now let me show you the lead line, and hopefully that can kind of show you why I like a lot of this half-step stuff, and kind of get at the concept of how I was saying melodically we can explore half-step movements within our voicings. Oh, and let me switch to a lead tone. All right, cool. So you could probably hear from that, I'm exploring some of those half-step movements that are happening within the harmony. So to start this guy off, our first chord is D major, right? So I'm basically just outlining D major. So that's all using the D major scale and a D major 7 arpeggio, right? So to start it off, I have my first finger here placed on the 12th fret of the high E string. And you'll notice too, I have my ring finger, my middle finger, and my first finger positioned at 11, 10, and 9 respectively. That's so I can do this little pull off that will have me arriving at 9, right? So I'm doing my 1, and then pulling off each individual finger so that I can arrive here at 9. And then I'm kind of just walking down the major scale, right? So I have my pinky here on the 12th fret of the B string to the 10th fret of the B string, 12th fret of the G string, and then I'm doing a quick hammer on from 9 to 11 on G, right? So, and then ending with my pinky on the 12th fret of the D string. So that's my opening phrase. And that's over the D major 7 and the G major 7, right? And you can see I'm sticking pretty much to the major scale there with, you know, a couple fills that are outside of the key, but they're really just passing tones. So nothing super crazy there. Then I'm coming up here So now I'm outlining the G major 7 a little bit more. So I have my first finger here on the 9th fret of the D string, up to the 12th fret on the D string, 9th fret on the G, to 11th fret on the G. So kind of outlining that shape, right? So far. So now I'm exploiting that kind of half-step movement that's happening within those major 7s, right? So what I'm basically doing is I'm saying, I want this this feeling of me moving up and down this little lick, but I'm shifting as the chords go, right? So I'm going up with the G major 7, and then I'm going down with the F sharp major 7. So to play that guy, I'm hammering on from the 8th fret to the 10th fret on the G string, bringing my pinky across to hit the 11th fret of the D string, using my first finger to play the 8th fret here on the D string, and then I'm kind of playing that tonic note of the chord, right? On the A string, so that 9th fret of the A string. So and you also hear too, I'm deliberately playing just a tiny bit behind the beat. It's not really something that I would notate, because it's, like I said, it's that part in that progression where the ear goes, ooh, something different's happening. I want to kind of see if I can use the rhythm to also influence that too, right? So we have all these other components that are working. The melody is kind of highlighting that, you know, that special moment within the progression. The harmony is obviously highlighting that special moment. So rhythmically too, I can play a little bit behind too that shows, you know, ooh, this is kind of a special place. He's, you know, he's playing a little bit behind. He wants to stretch the rhythm just like the harmony and the melody is being stretched. So playing over D major, playing over G major, now I'm playing over F sharp major. And then to end it, I'm just kind of doing a simple little kind of pentatonic thing. Just 3 notes, like I said. A lot of times when I have melodies that are doing something a little bit more, you know, advanced, I like to also have a place where there's just nothing too crazy happening. I'm letting the harmony tell the story. So I'm sliding up from the 9th fret to the 11th fret, and then back down to the 9th fret, and then to the 7th fret, all on the G string. So that's the melody for the A section. Now let's look at the B section melody. So I mentioned before, I have kind of a B flat major 7 sound, and this is a G major 7 over A, right? So as I was showing when I was playing the progression, that's a really cool kind of shifting sound, especially when I'm keeping the same voicing. So again, I want to exploit that with the melody. So I'm doing the same exact thing, I'm just going to be shifting it down. So I'm just walking up a B flat major 7 arpeggio. So that's hammering on from 7 to 8 on the D string. Then using my ring finger to play 7 of the G string. Using my middle finger to play 6 on the B string. And then using my first finger on the 5th fret of the high E. And then I'm just walking up the major scale. So I've used this little lick in other melodies that have happened throughout this course. And I'm emphasizing that too with my pick. I'm not just bringing it up only with hammer-ons and pull-offs. I'm kind of, you know, doing some extra stuff to make sure it kind of has a little bit more of an impact. So 5, 6, 8. And now I'm going. So if you could see, that was the same exact thing, right? So that's what I'm talking about. I want to, just like I kind of took the melody and took it a half step down, now I want to do the same thing with the other borrowed chord that's happening within my progression, right? But this one's a little bit more spread out. So you can hear too. And this one sounds like a little less kind of out and like, you know, not as much of a moment of importance maybe as as that might be, right? So just like I did that lick up here, I'm going to do it right down here. So I'm going to go 4, 5 on my D string, 4 on my G string, 3 on my B string, and then just walk up from 2, 3, 5 on the high E string. So again, just exploiting that kind of borrowed chord sound. So that's the entire lead line that's going to happen over that guy. And, you know, just to reiterate, a borrowed chord is when I'm saying, and we can also, obviously we didn't see this, but if I was in a minor key, I could do the same thing with a major key. So let's just say I'm in the key of D minor. I can say, okay, I'm in the key of D minor. I want to look at the parallel minor. So that's going to be D major. And I want to say, what are the numbers of that? What chords are occurring? I want to take some of those chords that obviously aren't going to be occurring in my minor key, and I want to insert those. That way, I kind of have this cool sound of it sounding like, oh, it's a minor key, but I've also got some major qualities to it. And so today we did the opposite of that, right? We were in a major key. I was in the key of D major, and I said, I want to look at the key of D minor, and I want to see if I can take some of those chords and insert it into my key of D major. So again, it has this kind of shifting sound of there's some minor aspects, but there's also some major aspects. And as we saw with it, I used 2 different examples. So I used one that was much more of a blatant example of it, right? Where I'm just kind of following exactly how I defined it. I'm saying, okay, I'm in the key of D major. I'm going to look at the 6th chord of D minor. So I'm looking at the parallel minor. I'm taking just the normal 6th chord. I'll add some extensions to it, but there's still nothing crazy, no substitutions. And I'm going to insert that into my progression. So I was taking the 6th chord from my my parallel minor, and then playing the 5 of my major, right? So that's kind of my straight up example. And then in the other part of the progression, I was saying, now I'm going to take some creative liberties. So I went from my 1 to my 4, and now I'm going to say, okay, the 3 chord is major within a minor key. So that's the only aspect I'm going to use from borrowed chords, is I'm just going to take my normal 3 chord, which would be F sharp minor in the key of D major, and I'm going to make it major to kind of get at that borrowed chord sound. What I'm not doing, and why this is kind of a creative liberty, is saying, let me actually take the 3 chord of a major key, because whereas I used F sharp in the progression that I played for you today, it would have been F natural, right? Because my minor key has a flat 3rd. So I'm basically saying, let me still use the same note, the same root note from my major scale, but I'll make it major as if I was kind of doing a borrowed chord, right? So I'm kind of bending the rules a little bit. It's kind of on the line. Some people would say, oh, that's not really a borrowed chord. But like I said, I'm just kind of using that idea of borrowing from the parallel minor and inserting it into my progression because I like that half-step sound that happens with major 9 chords. So see if you can get this progression under your hands. I know there's a lot of difficult movements here, and, you know, any place that you can kind of put those little cheats like I showed you with this guy. You know, I know some of these progressions are a little bit harder on the hands, but just like I showed at the beginning of the lesson, where I'm isolating parts that are difficult, seeing what I can get under my hands, and, you know, I'll emphasize this every week. I know there's a lot of theoretical concepts that are going on here, and, you know, a lot of it can seem really upper level. Take in as much as you can, but really just see if these progressions can really sit in your ear. So thanks for tuning in. Any questions, comments, or concerns you have, please put those in the comment section and I'll get those answered for you. Thanks. All right, everyone, we're back. So any comments, questions, or concerns that you might have about any of the progressions that I went over, anything relating to borrow chords, anything like that, please pass that along and I'll get that answered to you. So we'll see the questions as they come in and I'll get those answered. Okay. Let's see. Okay, so it seems tricky to get my ears used to this sound. Do you have any recommendations of music to listen to get used to these types of sounds? Great question. So there's a lot of different stuff, you know, like I've said, each week, you know, there have been kind of artists that I've talked about where, you know, certain things that I'm playing, certain chord progressions, certain substitutions, you know, a lot of artists come to mind. I would say one of the biggest people that I would listen to, who I think is kind of, you know, universally approachable, no matter what type of music you like, is Stevie Wonder. So, you know, he has an incredible discography. You know, he's a name that is, you know, right up there with the Beatles. And, you know, obviously it just gets into a competition of, you know, who you like. Stevie Wonder's always going to be my favorite. But if you listen to a lot of his music. It's really great because, you know, we're all familiar with Stevie Wonder's music. He's got an incredible discography, but he does a lot of things that relate to kind of the harmony that we've been talking about. He uses a lot of the same substitutions that I've been using. And, you know, he's really where I got a lot of these sounds from. So he's a really, really great person to listen to. And, you know, I think he's great too because obviously, you know, I could tell you a lot of great jazz artists who I like who do stuff like this are R&B artists. But Stevie Wonder is one of the people to me who's kind of universally acceptable. And, you know, like I said, I kind of feel like no matter what genre of music you like, there's always going to be some Stevie Wonder for you. So I definitely recommend listening to some Stevie Wonder, seeing if you can listen to Inner Visions, what was one of his albums that came out in the 1970s. That's a classic one. And it has, you know, a ton of, if you learn any of those songs, you know, there's going to be a lot of material there where, you know, obviously he's using the number system. He will keep it simple, 1-4-5 at certain points, but he'll also do a lot of substitutions without, you know, like I said, kind of going super out, making it sound super crazy. So he's definitely someone that I would recommend. On top of that, you know, I personally love Robert Glasper. He's a piano player. He's played with a ton of people. He works in R&B, jazz, hip hop, you name it, he's done it. So in the next 2 weeks, as we get into the modern magic part of those kind of progressions, we'll see some more stuff that's probably reminiscent of him. And again, just to go back to Stevie Wonder, a lot of his sound and a lot of the harmony that I hear, I can also sometimes hear in Stevie Wonder. And even though he's doing his own thing and he's doing it differently, I still think that harmony kind of carries over. So definitely would recommend those two. And then, you know, there's obviously a ton of other guitar players we could listen to. Isaiah Sharkey is a big one. Mark Lettieri, who's done a course here on jamplay.com, is another great person who does, you know, a lot of cool harmony, but, you know, has also played on a lot of hit records and a lot of things where he's not just, you know, like I said, my goal here is not to just play things that sound out or sound cool. I'm always trying to do something that will still sound musical. And, you know, all those people that I listed, they can play, you know, anything under the sun. They can do things that are crazy technical, but everything that they do, in my opinion, is really, really musical. And that's what matters to me if I'm trying to listen for things that are a little bit more advanced or kind of listening for more substitutions. Okay. What are the mechanics of getting that B flat major 9 chord? Yowza. Yeah. So I'll go over that guy one more time. Like I said, doing the full shape that I'm doing is definitely really advanced and it takes a second, but I'm really thinking about it as kind of, you know, the top part is kind of part one of this. So barring my first finger across from the low D string to the high E string, so D, G, B, and E, all with my first finger. And then, you know, the first kind of difficult part here is being able to get that stretch between your first finger and your middle finger with a chord, right? So my ring finger's here on the 3rd fret of the G string. My middle finger is here on the 5th fret of the G string. My ring finger is here on the 5th fret of the high E string, right? So that's the first part of it. And I would see if you could maybe just get that guy, like, kind of, get that guy kind of comfortable, right? And then see if you can work on reaching that pinky over. Like I said, this is a really big stretch, so it takes some time to really get a chord like that together, right? So just see how much of that you can do. And also another really great trick, so this wouldn't work in this key because we're in B flat major, but if I wanted to do this voicing in the key of A major, or just using some sort of A major, I do have an open A there, right? So I can make it a tiny bit easier on myself. But, you know, with anything, I always think breaking it up into small pieces is definitely going to be your best method of kind of approaching this chord. And, oh, and it looks like we got another one about this same chord. On that B flat major 9, how do you orient the middle ring and pinky? My ring collapses upwards, bent almost close at the first knuckle. Okay, so let me see if I can replicate your problem and then help solve it. So on the B major 9, almost closed at the first knuckle. So I'm having a little bit of, I guess, a hard time trying to understand exactly what your hand looks like. Obviously, you know, unless I'm seeing your hand, I can't fully understand what's going on. But I'm guessing, you know, having that pinky reach over is definitely giving you some difficulty. So like I said, having that middle finger and ring finger kind of in place and just thinking about this top part at first is going to be, you know, the first part to focus on. And then you'll notice
because a lot of times what happens is when we're working out a chord, you know, you'll notice this even if you're working on, you know, like the first time we played some of our first position chords, you know, you'll hear two notes are okay and then one note's not okay, right? And then you try to adjust that one, but now all of a sudden this note's not okay, right? So the piece of advice that I would give here, specifically to this chord, but also it's just a general piece of advice whenever we have chords that are kind of hard to reach, is, you know, when I'm doing this, you'll notice when I reach my pinky over, this part of my hand doesn't move at all. And that's obviously something that just comes from, you know, experience playing some of these larger chord voicings. But I would work on just getting this top part and then slowly seeing if you can reach your pinky over. And then another thing that I should probably add with this too is obviously, like, my hand is pretty far stretched over here, right? If I was doing like a Jimi Hendrix chord or something, a lot of time my thumb is either fretting the low E string or it's kind of wrapped around. But for something like this, I really need to reach with my pinky out. So if I was to turn my guitar around, you'll see my thumb is pretty much on the end of the fretboard, right? So I'm kind of doing that so that I have all of that reach that I need with my pinky. So it's almost like my hand is kind of on top of the fretboard. So like I said, just do your best, and if you can, see if you just do that, if you can just do that top part, and then slowly, you know, try this other voicing, and then see if you can get your pinky there. So see if you can break it up into pieces. Like I said, this is a really, really advanced chord voicing, and I know it may take some time, but breaking them into pieces is always our best bet. Okay, and then, let's see, what's your favorite solo? Ooh, that's a good question. I would have to maybe break that up into like a couple. So one of my number ones is, this is kind of a deep cut, but Jimi Hendrix did an album called Live at the BBC, and he played his song Hear My Train A-Comin', and there was an alternate take. And his solo on that was just like one of the things that really, really made me want to, you know, he was one of the first people that soloistically made me want to play lead guitar. So that one was like a really, really influential one. I learned every note of it. So that's the alternate take of Hear My Train A-Comin' off the BBC session tape by Jimi Hendrix. Great one, just amazing blues playing, and you know, he has that really vocal screaming quality to his guitar. And then, yeah, it's hard to say what my favorite one is. Another great one that kind of goes off of that, Derek Trucks had a live album, and he did a song called I Know, and I love that one because obviously, like, you know, I like jazz, I like a lot of stuff where there's a lot of different melodic elements going on, but you know, he's really keeping it simple with, you know, pentatonics, major scale, nothing super crazy, but you know, the way his inflection on it is just so vocal, and he's really somebody that when he plays, he's trying to replicate the voice. And to me, that's one of the most important things we can do as a solo player, or as any sort of melodic player, is trying to replicate the voice, trying to have a vocal quality to our instrument, because to me, you know, the voice is kind of the center of everything that I hear musically, at least. So those are definitely two that are pretty big. And then obviously I got to throw in one of just like some crazy licks that, you know, I really fell in love with. I mean, a lot of times, honestly, they're not guitar solos that I really like, so I'm a huge John Coltrane fan too. So I guess the last one I'd probably throw in there would be Blue Train by John Coltrane. Just, you know, amazing phrasing, very, very different from a lot of the stuff that I've been showing, and, you know, it would be technically really difficult to play on guitar, but, you know, he's really someone that influenced a lot of the harmony that we do, even if we might not be playing jazz, so I'll throw that one in there too. All right, and then coming from the same how do you approach composition? Oh, okay, cool. So another great question. A couple different ways. It really depends on, I think the thing that I hear most when I talk to people who are songwriters, or like if I ever watch an interview with someone, a lot of people start with different elements to writing a song. So a lot of people start with lyrics first. They say, you know, I'm going to write my lyrics and then I'm going to put a melody to it. I'm someone where basically when I want to compose something, I try to put together the chord progression, and then in putting that chord progression together, I'm trying to kind of hear how the melody is coming, right? So sometimes I'll hear the chord progression first and then the melody. Sometimes I'll hear the melody first and then the chord progression. But for instance, in today, you know, as I was kind of walking through those chords, you know, I heard this guy, and I was like, okay, you know, I want something that like I said, I like the sound a lot of times where I have the same exact chord voicing and I move it up a tiny bit, or I move it around a tiny bit, right? It's something that like is relatable even in like punk music, but it's really, really cool when I apply it to R&B or jazz or something that might not necessarily be like that, right? It has this very familiar sound, and as a guitar player too, obviously it's a lot easier to play when I'm keeping that same exact relationship to the root note. So like in today's chord progression, you know, I was basically just saying, okay, I want to have some flow, so I want to keep it within the number system. I was like, I want to have some coloration, so that's why I decided to choose these major 9 chords. And then, you know, I wanted to have something that, like I kind of described it as a ooh moment, right? I wanted something that was just a little bit surprising, but something that wasn't too overtly, you know, out or too much of a, you know, crazy change. So I would say it's kind of hard to say exactly how I approach composition, but I'm mainly like melody or harmony first. And like I said, if I come up with a chord progression I like, so in this case, I'll come up with a different melody over this guy. I could go dub dub, right? So now I'm just making a melody that's different from what we did. Obviously, it's got some of the same things, but I'm really trying to hear my melody and my harmony together to go. So that's mainly where I'm starting, and then, you know, if I was to write lyrics or something, that would always come last, and rhythm would usually kind of come after that too. I'm kind of basing that all around how I'm hearing the melody and the harmony. And, you know, the way that I kind of arrived at that is really just like learning songs and then analyzing those songs. That is the greatest, you know, piece of advice I could give to learning how to write songs, is just, you know, playing a song and then studying, okay, what makes this song great? Like I said back to Stevie Wonder, where someone said, you know, what's some music I can listen to that will get my ears kind of, you know, hip to these sounds that are going on. Same thing with Stevie Wonder. I can play his music and then I can go, okay, why do these chord progressions work? What makes them so cool? Let me see if I can write something that kind of does what he did, you know, on Golden Lady or something, but obviously, you know, not ripping him off and doing my own thing. So it's really just a matter of like trying to repeat what somebody did, analyzing what they did, and then slowly but surely you'll be able to kind of take things from each and every person. You go, okay, I'm going to use this little thing that I heard from the Beatles and this little thing that I heard from Stevie Wonder, and just kind of combine it all and do your own thing. So the biggest thing I could say is, like I said, learning other people's music, learning chord arrangements of other people's music, right? So learning to put the melody on top when you're playing those chords and kind of hearing how the melody and the harmony work together. So like I said, learn as much music as you can, analyze as much music as you can, and see if you can kind of make it your own. And it looks like that was our last question. So thanks for tuning in. These were some great questions today. This week, just see, like I said, if you can get this progression under your hands. I know there's a kind of a lot of theory to it, and like I said, there were some instances where I was playing what I would consider a straight up borrowed chord, and then, you know, my version of what I would maybe consider a borrowed chord. So just do your best to kind of get this position under your hands and see if you can really start hearing some of this stuff. And, you know, if there's like, for instance, if you really liked the way that this chord sounded, where I was taking the major third, right, of my key, but I made it, instead of having it be a minor chord, I was making a major chord. See if you can take one of your songs, one of your progressions, or just write your own progression and insert that, right? So all this stuff is available to you. If you like how something sounds in this, all of that's available to you to insert in your own progressions in your own songs. So just try to be creative with this stuff. And other than that, just keep practicing, and we'll tune in next week.